The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sharon Dooley, and I'm the moderator today. We have a topic that I think we're all interested in, tracing and extended events, and our speaker is Mindy Kernat. And we'd like to thank our sponsor, Dell Software. Their sponsorship makes it possible for us to have the raffle every session for the Amazon gift cards. If you're not familiar with SQL Saturday, you should get to know it. They're free one-day training events. They're all over the place, as you can see from this list. Go to SQLSaturday.com and you'll find the event that's near you. It's a whole day of presentations, conference quality presentations, and it's entirely free. If you haven't registered for Summit, you have until September 20th before the price goes up. You can use the discount code shown on this slide. It's also on our webpage to save $150. This is the event of the year, the premier SQL Server event in the world, and it's always an exciting time. And we're back in Seattle, so we'll have a strong Microsoft presence. You can get a preview of the summit by going to 24 hours of pass. It'll be 24 hours starting at midnight Greenwich Mean Time, and it'll go around the clock. It's free also. You can just register for the sessions that you're interested in. We're the database administration chapter, and we are one of many. And there are virtual chapters for a variety of interests, and some chapters have presentations in foreign languages as well. Check out the list. You can review the list at sequelpass.org. PASS is an all-volunteer organization, and yes, there's a headquarters staff, but it's the volunteers who keep it going and do all the things like set up the virtual chapter meetings and so forth. It's easy to volunteer. Just check off some boxes on your profile at sequelpass.org. There are now nominations open for the Passion Award, which will be given at the summit. It's given every year to an outstanding volunteer. Interestingly enough, most of the winners of the Passion Award have been women. Last year was unusual in that a gentleman from Russia who certainly deserved it because he works incredibly hard for PASS got the Passion Award. I don't know why it's usually women, but that's the way it's worked out. If you haven't signed up for a membership, do so. It costs nothing to join. And when you join, you can select the virtual chapters that you're interested in. And I know many of you have heard that Profiler is deprecated, and if you're one of the people like I am who considers Profiler sort of an absolutely necessary element of your life, the fact that it's going away, it hasn't gone away yet, but it is going to go away, is a problem. And the answer is extended events. This is a more, in some ways, is going to take longer to, at least for me, to master than Profiler. And I'm particularly looking forward to Mindy's talk. Mindy is a SQL Server MVP and has been involved with the community since 2000. She's presented at her user group and the past summits. She's going to present again this year, and she participates in SQL Saturdays. She was a subject matter expert for the SQL 2012 and 2014 certification exams, and she's a MS Press Books co-author. She's currently serving as one of the program managers for the past summit, and she's a distinguished engineer at Trimble Navigation TMW Systems. And you guys don't want to hear me, you want to hear Mindy. So let me just get my screen to rearrange itself, and I'll turn the meeting over to Mindy. Yeah, it's all yours, Mindy.
Okay. Are you seeing the screen with just the presentation on it, or are you seeing the screen in the next slide?
Now, just the presentation. It's perfect.
Awesome. Okay. Well, thank you for that wonderful introduction. This presentation, actually, I think it's really fun for somebody who's very familiar with Profiler and needing to move to extended events, because I'm going to show you how to do some important things in both tools and get the same exact results. So for me, it was a necessity for me to be comfortable with extended events, that I could see that it was doing what I was used to seeing in Profiler. So very quickly, and thank you for that nice introduction, so I don't need to spend a lot of time on this. I'm a wife and mother. I live in Dallas. I have a million hobbies, and I'm also a SQL MVP, and I've been working with SQL Server a very, very long time. If any of you want to follow me on Twitter, my Twitter handle is SQL Girl, and you can also email me at my Hotmail address. That's mindykernut@hotmail.com if you have any questions. I plan on making the scripts that I'm going to be using in the demos and these slides available to anybody that wants them after the presentation is over, so I'm sure we can figure out how to make that happen.
Mindy,
so very quickly,
Mindy, excuse me, if you send the slides and the demos to me, I can post them with the recording.
Okay, that sounds great. So what we're going to talk about, very quickly outlining this, I'm going to tell you kind of what we're going to do, and then we're going to very quickly talk about when do I use Profiler and when do I use extended events, and what do extended events have that Profiler doesn't have. And then we're going to look at 3 different approaches that I use. Oh, it says my microphone is really loud. Does it seem too loud to you guys? Well, somebody send a message and tell me if I'm blowing your ears out or turn your thing down. It's weird. I got a message from the little application saying your microphone is very loud.
Nobody's complaining.
So, we're going to talk. Okay, good. So I'm going to the 3 different ways that I use Profiler or extended events to basically look at very quickly what's going on within a system. I mean, I get this, we are having a problem, the application is slow. So we're going to talk about what those 3 different ways of using the tool are, because it's 3 different types of approaches. And we'll go through those and do a demo, and you'll see the scripts. And that will take about an hour. So very quickly, Profiler or extended events, when to use them, how to use them, as I just told you, and then the 3 different methods. So the Profiler trace, hopefully we're all used to this. you know, the events that you could capture in the profiler trace had not changed for a number of years. It was stuck at 200 events, and we were used to most of them. They stopped adding new events to Profiler, I believe, with SQL 2008. That was the last time we got any new events. The Profiler trace is heavier it's harder on a system than running extended events because, and we can talk about why, but basically the Profiler is capturing all sorts of additional information, whereas the extended events is only capturing what you've requested it to capture very specifically. And we all know that Profiler has been deprecated by Microsoft, but prior to SQL 2012, it was very difficult, in my opinion, to use extended events. And I support a customer base. I work for a software company. I have customers still on SQL 2005. I've got customers on many on SQL 2008 to 2008 R2. I have a good amount of them on SQL 2012 and now a small amount on SQL 2014. So the tool that I choose to diagnose what's causing slowness, whether it is going to be Profiler or extended events, is very much dependent upon, well, what is the level of SQL Server that I'm approaching. The other thing is I'm working remotely, so I want to be able to do everything with scripts too, and so everything we do today is going to be scripted. We're not going to be doing a bunch of clicking through GUIs or anything like that. So now extended events is the newer, I like these little graphs. So it's like Profiler's older sister, right? Or brother. It's more mature, it's more versatile. You can actually do some very unique things. You can have an event, and based upon the results of that event, you can fire another event. It's much more lightweight. And once you get to SQL 2012, it's actually, I wouldn't say it's easier to use than Profiler, but it starts to become just as easy, right? Not terribly difficult as it was in the earlier versions. So, and a lot more events. So if you're needing to get information about some of the new features, like always-on availability groups, or you know, certain things that they've added, things that have to do with newer features that have come out in SQL Server recently, you're obviously not going to be able to trace those events using a deprecated tool that they stopped adding to in SQL 2008. Okay. And this just shows very much that we've flatlined on the new events added to Profiler, and we just keep getting more and more and more fun events, things you can capture, things that you can learn about what's going on internally with the SQL Server as we proceed along with versions of SQL. So when I'm looking at performance issues, and there's obviously, you know, this isn't the de facto tool. There's a lot that you can go into identifying what's causing a performance issue. We're talking here about two different tools that you can use in the entire toolbox of tools, right? So if we wanted to see what was actually running on the SQL Server, and we're getting complaints of slowness in an application. If I'm using Profiler, generally what I'm going to do is capture 3 events. I'm going to capture the remote procedure call completed, which is known as event class 10. I'm going to capture the SQL batch completed, which is event class 12. Now those 2 events in and of themselves, coupled with a duration filter, are going to help me to identify if I have a long-running query on the SQL Server, as long as that query isn't so long-running that it's never completing. Now, on the extended events world, I have equivalent events, matching events. So if I was doing an extended event capture, and I'm used to capturing event class 10 and 12 on the Profiler trace, in extended events, I'm going to capture, that's just worded a little bit differently, but it's the exact same thing, RPC completed and SQL batch completed. And I'll show you how we go ahead and do this, but when we capture a Profiler trace and an extended events trace of the same exact workload, we'll get the same results from either of these tools being used at the same time. Now, coupled with that, normally when I use Profiler, I also capture an event class that is sort of a drill down of the above two. So in fact, it's a drill down of event class 10. I capture event class 45, which is my stored procedure statement completed. I also use a duration filter with that. On Profiler, I get one duration filter for my entire trace, right? So if I say capture these 3 event classes and anything that took longer than 2 seconds to complete, I'm going to get not only event class 10 and 12 where it took longer than 2 seconds to complete, but the stored procedure that completed in event class 10, if any single statement within that stored procedure took longer than 2 seconds, I'll get that one statement. Statements within the stored procedure that were completed in less than 2 seconds will be excluded from my Profiler capture. So it allows me a bit of a drill down, and I can see if it is a stored procedure and it's long, what area of the stored procedure should I focus in? I have the exact same equivalent over in extended events. SP statement completed does the same thing as event class 45 on my Profiler trace. So what I've done is I've sort of mapped here my Profiler columns there in column 1, and then my extended events and my 3 different extended events that I would capture. So in the Profiler, here's the thing with Profiler, I get one set of columns. Now I can go and choose and pick, but these columns are basically, I can specify one set of columns for the entire capture of the Profiler trace. The neat thing about extended events is for each event that I'm capturing, I can pick different columns if I wanted to. So that's why I wanted to show this. This is why this is a little bit more dynamic and can be a lot more lightweight. Now the columns that are in black are your default columns, and then the ones that I'm showing here in red are ones that you would need to add. So there's a lot more that you have to go in and add on the extended events that you don't just get automatically if you're using the wizard, or if you're just adding, if you just add that extended event without specifying columns, you'll get the black ones. The interesting thing is if you look at the SP statement completed, and if you see 3 rows from the bottom, the object name on that one is green. It's very strange. That one is not included. You have to do some, and it's not really something you can add as an additional. It has to be done kind of special, and that's a head scratcher. But I'll have that in my script, and you can see how I've done that. So this template allows me to get from what I'm really used to, which is using my Profiler server-side trace, and how am I going to be working with my extended events in a way that's familiar to me. Okay, so let's talk about the 3 things, the 3 ways of using Profiler or extended events to identify what's wrong in a query or on a server. So the easiest one to me is to identify I've got a long-running query. I've got a big monstrous query doing 25 million reads or 2 trillion reads or something horrible, and it's eating up all this CPU, and it's running for 5 minutes at a time, and it's a job that runs every 5 minutes, and the thing runs for 5 minutes. That is the easy, that's the easy diagnosis, right? That's where I'm going in and I look at the patient and I go, oh, look, you ate a basketball, right? I mean, that's easy to spot. That's what I always hope for when I'm doing one of these, because it's sort of a no-brainer. So this is where you're basically going to use, you're going to look for something that's consuming resources, and blocking, it's generally going to be blocking everyone else most of the time, right? So not only is it running a long time, but it's taking locks out that aren't being released, and then everybody else stacks behind it and can't get out the door. So okay, so when is it useful? When this is when somebody calls up and said, well, you know, it's generally fine, but you know, a couple of times a day, nobody will be able to work at all. Occasionally, we don't really know when, or it always happens around 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Everybody gets locked up. You're having blocking issues. Perhaps it's not that. Perhaps it's a particular area of the application. When we go to save an order, if that order has 3 parts to it or more, it takes a minute to save. Is it, you can replicate that? Yes, great. Okay, let's go in and see if we can find it in a trace. You know, generally this is when you're going to be using these Profiler tools or the extended events tools, you don't have a budget for third-party tools, right? Or you're you're coming into someone else's system, so you can't be installing third-party software on their system to help you capture this stuff. If you need to leave a trace running or an extended event capture running and wait for this to happen, this is when this is also going to be helpful, or when you need to drill down, which we're going to use that event class 45. So what we're going to do is we're going to capture the two event classes that I said were sort of the top level, the remote procedure call completed and the SQL batch completed. We're also going to get the stored procedure statement completed. We're going to put a duration filter on the trace and on the extended event capture of anything longer than, say, 5 seconds, that's a very long time for a query to be running. With the profiler tool, now when you're running profiler tool or the extended events tool, if you as long as you're doing a very high healthy duration filter and you've watched it and you're not capturing massive amounts of stuff into the trace, you can generally leave this running. It's very important that you have something that you're filtering on that keeps the trace from being massive, right? And in that case, as long as you're doing filtering, the performance hit should be pretty low. So let's do a demo here real quick. And this is where, let me see here, I'm going to do this. Get this demo up. Okay. I'm going to switch screens real quick. And show my monitor 2. Okay. Are you seeing the screen that has the SQL Server on it at this point?
Yes.
Okay, good. Thank you. Okay, so what I've done here, this is what's called a server-side trace. I hardly ever, I wouldn't say never, but I very, very rarely use Profiler. And what I've done here is I've created a wrapper around, I've created a stored procedure that I use that's a wrapper around creating a server-side trace. This is all how to use it, but basically this stored procedure has a whole bunch of different parameters that you can use. Basically, you tell it where you want the trace to go, how long you want the trace to run, what you want the duration filter to be. Do you want to capture completed events? Do you want to started events? Do you want errors and warnings? Do you want to filter on host name, login name, application name, SPID? Do you want to capture deadlock? So these are all bit flags, and based upon how you call this stored procedure, and you're all welcome to have this. Let me zoom down here. It goes through and it basically it builds the actual path so that it names the trace intelligently, so that when you look at the trace, you can tell the server that the trace was taken on, you can tell what bit flags were turned on and the date time that the trace was started. So when I look at the trace and I have a name of a trace, I know, well, just by looking at the name of the trace, I know what was captured in the trace. So it's very handy that way. I can tell basically the customer, the date, and what kind of trace was captured. So if I come down here, this is how these are, and this is using the actual stored procedures from within SQL Server that ship with SQL Server. They're in the master database, the same ones that the profiler tool uses to start a trace up. So if somebody was to turn on the completed events flag, then these would be the event classes that I'm going to capture. Now I'm also capturing 41 here. I had talked about 10, 12, and 45, but these are the ones that I'm capturing here if you turn on completed events, if you turn on started events. So I don't need to go through this a lot, but basically this is just a wrapper that starts a server-side trace. So now I'm using the credit database. That's a database that you can download from Microsoft, from Codeplex, I believe. You can go out and Google it. Anybody can get it. It's very small. You can use this against any database, though. So I'm going to actually put this into the credit database, and then I'm going to do two things. I'm going to actually start up a trace using, this is the profiler trace. I'm starting up a trace. I'm sending the trace to this location. I'm running it for 5 minutes. I'm capturing anything that's longer than 5 seconds, and I'm only getting completed events. So this will start a trace up for me, and then you can see it reports to me, hey, this is the name of your trace, right? Here's my server, and then here's my date, and it's a duration filter of 5 seconds, and we're getting completed events, right? So this is my trace that started. Now at the same time, I'm going to go and I'm going to do an extended events capture. So with an extended events, I've also got this scripted. It's going to create an extended event session, which you can see over here if I refresh this. This is where my extended events sessions show up under Management Extended Events Sessions. And you could right-click this and go through your GUI also if you wanted. I'm going to add the RPC completed event. I'm going to add those columns that were not default. So the ones that I want extra that were shown in that grid that I had. And I'm going to say for this RPC completed, I want any RPC completed that's over 5 seconds. I'm going to add stored procedure statement completed. I'm going to tell it which columns I want. See, this is different because I can pick the columns I want per event. So I want these columns, and look, I can change the duration filter to be something different than the one above, which I can't do that in, so this is supposed to be 5, right? If I was doing it the same, but I could do it differently. I can't do that with a trace, with the profiler trace. And then I'm going to add the SQL batch completed and add the non-default columns. And I could put this to something completely different also, right? Now, I think I have this as milliseconds, microseconds. Let's just go ahead and run this. And then here's where I'm going to be putting the trace file. I've got, this is where it tells it, where I'm going to be actually writing it to a file. I could write it to memory if I wanted, but I work with remote customers, so I want to get the file, right? So I'm going to be writing the file, and I'm telling it the maximum size of the file and should the file roll over or not, and that's included in my stored procedure also. I just didn't show it to you. So here I'm going to start up my extended events capture. Okay. And then I'm going to go to 1C and I'm going to run some code. So what I'm doing here is I'm actually going to, I'm going to create some tables, and I'm going to make basically a situation where I have something that runs along, just to keep it simple, right? So I'm creating a table, I'm shoving some colors into it, and then I'm putting a trigger on the table, and in the trigger, I have a pause in the middle of this trigger. So I have a wait for, which, can you imagine something worse than putting a wait for in the middle of a trigger? But, so I'm going to do that. So I've set up this table, I've set up a trigger on the table, and now I'm going to actually run some code that's going to loop through and take about 40 seconds to complete. Now once this is done, I'll be able to go and look at my traces. Hopefully I still have my trace running. Let's see, make sure, because I'm talking for more than 5 minutes, right? Yes, it's still running. So here's my trace that's still running. So I'm letting this go, and let's get to 1D where we can analyze this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go see my, where I put that trace. Hold on. This is great. 1 second. I have a, my virtual phone does not let me hang up on it. Something's broken with it. Okay, now I have a recording and can prove it. So let me get out here. So I'm going to gaps. Here's my traces. Okay, so here is the trace that I just took just now. And I'm going to do a global replace through this script so that I don't have to go find it and paste it everywhere. And then my extended events capture that I just did is, I think I need to go stop the extended events capture real quick. So let me go stop this. Good. And then here is my extended events capture copy. Okay. Place. Okay. So what I'm going to do is look at these two different, so here I have a way of looking at my extended events. Now the extended events, that capture, that file, is all XML. So what I'm doing here is I'm actually using this function, let me see, this fn.exe file target read file function, and I'm pointing at this extended events trace that I just captured, right? And then I'm actually going and parsing out the columns just so that I can look at it in a way that I'm used to looking at it, which is how I'm used to seeing it in Profiler. So I'm doing this with a common table expression. So I have a common table expression that that goes against the XML and turns it into the columns that I'm used to seeing, and then that way I can actually just do my query, right? So here I'm looking at what's in my extended events trace, and it says, hey, you had one execution, and where's my duration file? My duration was 40 seconds, because that's in microseconds. Here's the statement, right? And this statement took 40 seconds to complete. Okay, I get that. And here's my looking at it with Profiler. And I've got 40 seconds, and here's the statement. So if I look at them together, and I come down here, and I'm sorry if it's so small. Now the interesting thing is on the extended events, I have a physical reads, and I also have a logical reads, which I didn't have that on my Profiler trace. This is the result of my extended events capture. This is the result of my Profiler capture. And you can see that now I've got a way of making this, I'm like, oh my gosh, it's familiar, right? I understand now what's going on because I speak this language. I speak this language. I've done this for years and years, and now I can see it in a way that I'm used to seeing it, at least, and I can get comfortable and get my feet in and dip my feet in there. So this is identified. I have a long-running query. Now, I also, if I wanted to look at the event class 45 in there and drill down, I could do that. And let's see what SPID, it is SPID 81. So if I looked at the SP statement completed, which remember that maps to the same event class 45, if I said, okay, that was a stored procedure, that was either a SQL batch statement or a stored procedure that took 40 seconds to run. If I asked for it for individual statements from within a call, what would I see? And so in this case, I have my XML on the top, and here's my XML, and I have 41 rows, and it tells me I've got to wait for, 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 right? And then here's my Profiler trace, and I've got to wait for, and I've got to wait for. This is nice. It's telling me it's the trigger called UT colors, right? But why do I have 41 here and I only have 40 here? So what's missing? So I had one additional statement, and I thought before it had showed me what it was. But look how tiny the duration is there too. So I think that's why I had that microseconds. This one, I'll have to figure out what that is. I shouldn't have even brought that up. But you see that I've got basically the same information on the top and the bottom. I'm able to drill down. I'm able to see the wait for. I'm able to see my durations. I've got my same event classes. So this is an apples to apples sort of comparison using both tools. Okay, So that's your long-running query identification. Let me jump back over to my presentation. Okay. Hopefully you're looking at the presentation again. So that's what you're generally going to hope for, is that I'm going to find this big, fat, long-running query, and that I'm going to go, oh, you know, obviously you're not going to see a bunch of wait fors in it. It's going to be a big query. You're going to pull it out and look at it. You're going to need to do some kind of rewriting of it, or getting rid of a subselect, or adding some kind of index, but it's going to be right there, and it's going to be one big query. And that's like the holy grail of easy tuning going on. Now, that's not always, you know, that's, especially if you've been tuning on a system for a while, pretty soon those are all gone, and then you have more difficult tuning. So the second one we're going to look at is what I call the 1,000 paper cuts. This is where I've got, I do my initial trace or my initial extended events capture, and I say, give me anything over 5 seconds and I get nothing back. Give me anything over 2 seconds and I get nothing back. Give me anything over 1 second, I get nothing back. Okay, give me anything over half a second, I get nothing back. What's going on, right? This is not good. So the lower I take that duration dial, the more difficult the traces or the extended event capture is going to be on the client's SQL server, right? Or on your SQL server, because you're basically making it where you're going to capture a whole bunch of statements. So when we do a trace or an extended events capture where we take that duration filter really low, or we're filtering on something that's not really very selective so that we're getting a lot of information into the trace, I generally try to do the trace for very, very short periods of time, and I try to make it very clear that I could be causing some performance issue in trying to attempt the diagnosis. But hopefully it's a very short thing. So the 1,000 paper cuts, what's the problem, right? I can drop a 5,000-pound boulder on someone and kill them. I can also kill them with a load of gravel. So this is the same type of thing, right? This is where I've got, and when does this happen? When it generally happens when you have scalar functions, when you have looping, when you have Cartesian products, when you have applications that that are writing the SQL dynamically themselves and don't do a good job, if any job at all, of doing joins. So, you know, you've gotten away from using stored procedures, you've gotten away from letting developers actually write the SQL code, and you're letting the actual application, whatever the data access layer that you've chosen to use, write that code, and it's bound to individual tables. A lot of times you'll see this sort of family tree of queries coming through, and there'll be millions and millions and millions of queries just to do what could have been, you know, 2 stored procedures or 3 queries with a bunch of joins in them. Now these can take a long time, and the slang for this that has been going around a while within the SQL community is rebar, or row by agonizing row. It takes analysis to spot this. You might cause performance issues in just trying to diagnose this. And basically this is something that's going to be difficult to fix most of the time. I mean, unless you've got full access to whatever's causing the code to come across this way, this can be challenging. But the nice thing is, by using the profiler tool or the extended events tool, you can make this very visible to your development team what exactly the problem is. And a lot of times they can't see it, right? You can take these and you can aggregate things up, you can group things, you can say you did this same statement 15,000 times, and you can show them in an Excel workbook what is going on. So these, I like to use this when, now let's say there is this particular part of the application that's slow. They say, okay, it's slow when we save, and you go in and you do a trace when the person saves, and you're filtering on their SPID, and you're filtering, you know, you give it a 5-minute duration a total, you say run this trace for 5 minutes, and I'm going to filter on their SPID, which is fairly granular, and I'm going to get anything over 1 second. You get nothing. So what do you do next? You take that duration filter down. Take it all the way down. Take it to 0 if you need to, as long as you're filtering on their SPID. You start up the trace, or you start up the extended event. You have the individual do absolutely nothing more than hit the save button, because you don't want pollution in your trace, right? So to stage this up, you get them to get right in the application to right before where they're going to do what they're going to do, and get them to just stop. Don't move the mouse. Don't do anything. You start the trace, or you start the extended event. You have that duration filter down to 0. You're filtering on their SPID, or you're filtering on their host name and the application name, or whatever you can grab onto. You say, okay, hit save and tell me when it finally finishes. And they hit save, and then 2 minutes later they say, okay, I got the mouse back. Okay, good. And then you stop the trace. You said, don't move anything, don't touch anything. Stop the trace, stop the extended event, whichever one you're using. Now you have information in this trace, exactly what happens in what order, every single step, and you're not missing events like you might get if you're actually using the profiler tool, the older tool. It'll skip events. This way you've got everything. So let's go ahead and do that. We talked about this, duration filter 0, specific item that you're filtering on, very short. Be ready for it to actually have a performance hit, but hopefully it's worth all the pain. Okay, so we're going to do a quick demo of this. I'm going to show my other screen again. All right, so now we're going to go to 2A. So I have an application that I had my developers write for me that does this. It loops and loops and loops and loops and loops, right? And we named this application SQL DP. And so I'm going to actually filter on the application name in this case, because it's the only one that's running. Now, if I was trying to get the user SPID, I would go in and sys processes. I would do, find exactly what their SPID is. But as long as you've got something, either an application or a SPID or a login name or a host name, and you've confirmed that, you might do a little quick test trace and just, for 1 minute and capture and make sure that you've got the right person, then you can go ahead. So we're going to do this for 5 minutes, and we're going to get completed events. And then when we get ready to do that, at the same time, we're going to do the same type of capture on the SQL DP application using extended events to capture a trace, doing the exact same thing. So we'll have these two side by side once again. So I'm going to go ahead and start up my first trace, and then I'm going to start up my extended events capture. Okay, and then I'm going to go get this SQL DP application, and I'm going to start this little app up, and I'd be happy to give you the code for this app if you wanted to play with it. It's super rudimentary. Okay, and we're going to put it to credit, and we're just going to use Windows Authentication. I'm going to have it do 200 loops and wait 2 seconds in between. Let's actually have it do 50 loops and have it wait 3 seconds between each loop. Okay, so you can see I've got an application that's running, and it's running slow. And like, let's say this is your billing app, and I start getting these hourglasses, and I don't know what's going on, and my users are calling and they're like, this app is slow and nobody can tell what's happening. So at this point I would be capturing what I need to capture in order to try to diagnose what's going on here. I don't even have the screen responding anymore, right? So let's go and see what we're going to do on the next step and get ready to stage that. So we ran that. D. Okay. So I need to go and get my file name for both my trace and my extended events. So here's my new trace that I started at 143. So I'm going to copy the name of that trace. That's my actual trace right here. And then my extended events. Oops, I got to stop the extended events capture. I think we've captured enough to show what's going on with that. So we're going to just stop the extended events, stop the extended events capture, and we're going to stop the trace. We're good. And hopefully this is my trace ID. I don't think I need to explain how I'm doing that. So let me go and get the extended events capture here, which would be this one. And I'm going to paste that in over this one right here. Okay, so when I look at the two of these next to each other, I can see the top one, I've got 51 rows, and the bottom one, I've got 51 rows, right? So I basically have confirmation, and here's the physical reads. That one, I don't have that in my trace, so to line these columns up and see, I've got the same things. So I've got 51 rows. So I had 51 statements, and look, each one of these statements is taking what looks like a bunch of time, right? Now here's the difficult part in the extended events is I just get a timestamp. So in the trace, I have a start time and an end time, and then I have my duration also, right? So here, if my start time and my end time, they're both at 577 milliseconds, then I know that this is microseconds because I didn't even move forward 1 microsecond. So this is, 0.0577735 and point whatever, right? 577 and add to that. So I can tell here, the thing about extended events with just having this timestamp, if I wanted to actually see the start time and end time, I have to actually do some math with the duration and the timestamp here. And we're going to do that in the next step because that's an important thing that we're going to have to do in order to accomplish the third diagnosis. But here I can see I've got all these statements. I'm like, what am I doing with the same statement over and over and over and over and over and over? And I can see, I can paste in here. I'm getting different parameters coming in. So it's not exactly the same statement, but nothing is actually really running long. So not the perfect example, but if I had 51 statements and each one of them was taking, say, 3/4 of a second, by using this method, I would be able to identify that that's what's causing my performance issue, is I've got 51 things taking 3/4 of a second. That becomes a problem, right? Or 51 things taking, or worse, I've seen cases where I've got 51,000 things and each one is taking 45 milliseconds, right? That becomes a problem. So here you can actually see, and you can see the logic of what I'm doing exactly, round and round and round. So this would help me to identify these 1,000 paper cut type of problems using this type of method. Now very quickly, if I jump back over, let me get back to because we're going to go right from this and these traces into the next way of looking at what's going on. So let me jump back to my monitor 1. And okay. So this last one is the most difficult one from a DBA point of view. This one is the most difficult because there's absolutely nothing you can do about it, right? You have to go and give this back to the developers. And so all you can do is use SQL to prove that SQL is not the problem and to show the developers between this SQL statement and this next SQL statement is where the problem must lie in the application. And it's actually very useful to use SQL in that manner, but a bit it's a little bit non-traditional. So I like to call this the sounds of silence because what we're going to be doing is looking at the gaps in between, and hopefully There are people on the call who remember this album. When I was a little girl, it was a great album. But the thing I like about this line is the silence like a cancer grows. Because this is what I'm going to be showing you. It's just not SQL, and of course SQL is going to get blamed for it. SQL is basically guilty until you prove that SQL is not the one causing the problem. And the thing about this particular issue, you will never find it in wait stats because SQL is not waiting for anything. This is not a SQL Server issue. We're going to use SQL to show that the issue is elsewhere. Sort of like throwing the, having a game of fetch with your dog and your dog won't give you the ball back, then, is it your fact, are you not throwing the ball well? No. This is a problem that is completely out of your control. It's on the other side. So this takes analysis to spot. I've got a really good script that helps to make this much easier though. And you do the same exact kind of trace that you're doing with 1,000 paper cuts or extended events capture. This can be caused not only by an application doing something, perhaps the application at that point is shelling out to a DLL and that's having to get something off the web. Perhaps you've got a firmware issue and you've got actually slowness between the SQL calls. You've got a problem on your switch, or your application host is overloaded, and so the application host can't turn around the statements it's asking the SQL Server for. There are all kinds of reasons why an application can be slow that have absolutely nothing to do with SQL Server, but of course SQL is going to get blamed. So very quickly, let's go ahead and look at this. And here's my little graphic showing there are two different ways scenarios. So one would be we have latency. We have network latency. We have application latency. Somebody's got a real slow workstation. Somebody's working over a VPN. We've got an overloaded host, and we've got a Citrix farm, and all of the Citrix machines are overloaded, and it's a client-server app, whatever it may be. Every time we get to the SQL Server is, it's playing a mean game of tennis. But this guy over here, whatever's happening on this side, so we have a statement that goes to the SQL Server, boom, runs fast, SQL throws it back. But we've got this delay for it to receive the result set, for the application to go do something, 110 milliseconds in between. Next statement comes. So all we're going to see in the trace and the extended events is 5 milliseconds, 2 milliseconds, 6 milliseconds. We're not going to see anything that makes it easy to diagnose. So what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to look at these actual durations, difference of time between my end time and my next start time, my end time and my next start time, right? I'm going to try to find what is this delay, what is my latency on the app side that has nothing to do with SQL Server. And here's another scenario where actually maybe this is where the application is shelling out to a DLL that goes out, does a web call, and then comes back. So we're actually playing fast game of tennis, boom, 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 and then pause, boom, 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 and then the total duration from the user's perspective was 1 minute and 30 seconds, and we spent 13 milliseconds on the SQL Server. So we can see this too. So this is what we're going to look at now. The same exact type of trace, same, just like we did before. So let's jump over here to the SQL Server and I'll show you that. All right, change the screen to, okay. So we're going to go to 2D, D, E, G. Here we go. Okay, so I need to go and get that same extended events capture here. Copy. Let me paste this in here. Okay. And then we want to paste this in here. And we want to get the trace from this one also. This is from the little application that we ran that had the pauses in it. Okay, so very quickly, if I want to look at my my extended events trace, and I wanted to do what I would normally have done in my profiler trace. Remember I said there's no start time? This is the query I normally would have started with, is I'm going to take and try to find the difference between the act to get a total duration, right? I'm going to try to get the max end time of my trace and subtract the minimum start time of my trace to get the total overall duration of the entire trace, of that user's experience. Well, I can't do this if I try to do this in extended events because I have that timestamp and I don't have a start time and end time. It just, there is no start time field, right? So that doesn't work. So what I had to do was I had to come in here and basically do some math where I'm getting the end time and I'm subtracting in microseconds the duration from the end time and backing into the start time. A little clunky, but it works, right? So when I look at this, I'm basically going to say, okay, now this is my summary of my trace. And I can zoom in on this. All right. All right, so my trace, this is from my extended events point of view, I did 103 total reads on that out of 51 total statements in my trace. I had 103 total reads. That's nothing, right? And my total duration was 30 seconds, and my time on the SQL server was 7. I think this is 7. Hold on, let me see. I'll be able to look at this. So my start time and my end time total was 30 seconds, and my total duration was time on SQL this is 7,000 microseconds, and my total duration total in seconds. So this one is microseconds and this is seconds. So this isn't even 7/100ths of a second on the SQL server, but I had a total duration of 30 seconds. So that right there would tell me it probably isn't SQL that's got the problem. To look at the same thing, and this is the summary part, we'll get into the diff. This is doing it from the profiler point of view, the same exact thing. So I can do it either way, right? So how can I have, I have barely any time on the SQL server, just in a nutshell, but I have this huge duration total for the whole user's experience. Doesn't make any sense. So let's go to my script number H. I got to copy this same. It dynamically generates the trace name each time, so I have no choice but to keep pasting this over. Okay. This one is the same. That's H, I. We're going to go to I. All right. All right. And then we're going to get the trace. I don't know if I had a SPID in here. I'm not going to worry about the SPID. Okay. Okay, so what I'm doing here now is I'm going to come in and look at both my extended events trace and my profiler capture trace, and I'm going to actually do some manipulation where I do well, it's easier to explain it with looking at the profiler one first. So what I'm basically doing is I'm doing a common table expression, and I'm using the row over functionality to basically order the rows by end time, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 through 51, right? And then I can go against the common table expression and I can self-join the common table expression on itself, where I'm actually putting side by side row 51 and row 50, row 50 and row 49, row 49 and row 48. So now I can look at the started time compared to the completed time of the previous event, and I can calculate the missing time in between those, right? So if I had space, if I had very quick behavior on the application but suddenly a pause, I'm going to see it. And here I'm saying, now I don't have to say where it's more than 1 second, right? I only had 51 rows here, so if I'm looking at the actual profiler trace here, I can see I'm capturing everything here now, right? I can see here's statement, here's row number 2, so this is row 1 and row 2, row 2 and row 3, row 3 and row 4, row 4 and row 5. So I can see I have no pause, no pause, no pause, no pause. Wait a minute, I waited 3 seconds. No pause, no pause, no pause, no pause. Hey, I waited 3 seconds. And you can see this when you're looking at what's basically going on here is I went from 1344.12 to 1344.15. And if I were to go and look in the trace a little bit closer, I would see that this one completed at 12 seconds and this one didn't start until 15 seconds. So I would have now generally I'm going to have a whole lot of statements coming in. So what I would do is I would actually say, where the pause is longer than 1 second. And I would see that between this statement and this statement in my application, I've got application pause. Now, doing the same exact thing up here with Profiler, it's a little bit more clunky because I had to do all that math to figure out what the start time and the end time were, right? But I basically get the same exact, and the code's a little bit longer because I'm parsing the XML, but I get the same exact thing. So this is the last place you want to be going because at this point, it's out of my hands, right? Now I have to go get somebody involved. I probably got to get a new DLL made. It's whatever. I got to have the application distributed to people. This isn't fun, but this at least proves that this problem is not the SQL Server causing the problem. Okay, let me jump back over here. Come on, screen 1 again. Yeah, okay. So, in summary, we've got 3 ways of using either the Profiler tool or the extended events. They both work. They give you the same results. I have the scripts to show you how to do either one of them, so no matter what version of SQL you're on, you can pull this off. You have your long-running query analysis, your 1,000 paper cuts analysis, or going for the hard one, the sounds of silence, which is it's the application or it's something that's not on the SQL Server that's causing pauses. You're going to go for the long-running query first. That's the easy fix, the easy win. 1,000 paper cuts, you still might be able to do something if it's like a trigger that's causing the problem or some sort of scalar function or something that you can get to and do something about. But the sounds of silence one, that's going to be you're going to have to learn how to communicate with your development team and fix that one. And that is my presentation. I'm sure people have questions. I'm sorry I went over a tiny bit. It's a lot to cover in an hour.
Thank you, Mindy. Yes,
So
indeed, there are some questions.
How do we find out if there are any questions?
I have them open.
Hello.
I have the list of questions.
Well,
I'm trying to figure out why you
if
can't
the moderator
hear me.
doesn't come back on, you can always email me at mindykernot@hotmail.com, and I'd be happy to answer your questions.
I'm here, and I don't know.
Like I said, I'm going to give the presentation and all of the scripts out, and they'll be available to everybody. If you want to email me, I'll send them to you in a zip file so you don't got to go digging for them. I hope everybody got something out of this. And that's it. Unless the moderator comes back on, I can't see the question.
I'm trying, and let me make myself the presenter.
I wish I'm good.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
I'm not hearing you.
I don't know what's going on. This has happened. I can hear you. I'll have to send you the question list. I just sent you a chat.
Okay, she's actually typed to me and said that she's going to email me the question list, that this has happened before on the GoToWebinar, that it sort of locked her out of being able to speak. So I apologize for that. But she'll send me the question list and I'll go over it. And I'm sorry not able to answer questions. That would have been good. But thank you for coming today. And I guess that's it. Have a good afternoon. Oh, and she wanted me to say that she's sorry also.